Clara Hayes sat on the curb outside the Hale Hotel, the cold rain soaking through her waitress uniform, her final paycheck a crumpled weight in her fist. The golden glow of the hotel's grand lobby spilled onto the wet pavement, a cruel contrast to her reality. At 24, Clara had carried the burden of raising her 14-year-old brother, Ethan, since their mother, Helena, died 2 years ago. Now, tears mixed with rain on her face as she replayed the humiliation inside, Adrian Cross's mocking words, the champagne spilling when she pulled away from his grabby hands, and Mr. Lowell's cold voice firing her in front of a dining room full of elite guests. Her fingers found the silver star pendant around her neck, her mother's last gift, its edges worn but grounding. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm trying so hard for Ethan." The city's noise blurred into the rain's steady drum, horns, distant chatter, the splash of tires. Clara's sneakers were soaked, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks, but she couldn't move, not yet. Ethan was waiting at their cramped apartment, probably heating up leftovers and worrying why she was late. The paycheck in her hand wouldn't cover next month's rent, let alone his school supplies. She'd promised him stability, a future, but tonight she felt like she'd failed. The pendant gleamed faintly under a streetlight, and she clutched it tighter, as if it could anchor her against the storm, both the one pouring down and the one inside her. A sleek black car pulled up to the hotel's entrance, its headlights slicing through the rain. Clara barely noticed, too lost in her thoughts, until a shadow loomed over her. She looked up, blinking against the downpour, to see a man in a tailored coat standing under an umbrella held by a driver. Victor Hale, 52, billionaire industrialist and owner of the hotel, had a reputation for being as unyielding as steel. His sharp features were set in a frown, but his eyes locked onto the pendant at Clara's throat. His posture stiffened, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The silver star was unmistakable, the same one he'd given to Helena, the woman he loved, before she vanished from his life 30 years ago. Victor stepped closer, rain dripping from his umbrella as he waved the driver back. Clara scrambled to her feet, clutching the paycheck, her eyes wary. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice hoarse but firm, expecting another reprimand. Victor's gaze didn't waver from the pendant. "That necklace," he said, his tone low, almost urgent. "Where did you get it?" Clara's hand flew to the star, her fingers curling protectively around it. She didn't know this man, didn't trust the intensity in his stare, but something in his voice, raw, almost haunted, made her pause. "It was my mother's," she said, her voice cracking as she met his eyes. "Why do you care?" Victor's expression shifted, a flicker of shock crossing his face. He took another step, closing the distance, and Clara tensed, ready to walk away. "Your mother," he repeated, softer, like he was testing the word. "What was her name?" Clara's heart raced. She didn't owe this stranger anything, not after tonight, but the way he looked at the pendant, like it carried a ghost, stirred something in her. "Helena," she said, barely above the rain's patter. Her name was Helena. Victor's umbrella tilted, letting rain spill onto his shoulder, but he didn't notice. His mind was elsewhere, back to a summer when he was 20, when he'd slipped that same star pendant around Helena's neck, promising her a future before she disappeared without a trace. "Helena," he echoed, his voice rough. He looked at Clara again, really looked at her, seeing traces of Helena in her fierce eyes, her defiant jaw. "How old are you?" Clara frowned, stepping back, the rain chilling her further. "Why does that matter?" "Look, I've had a bad enough night." She turned, her sneakers squelching, but Victor's voice stopped her. "Wait, please. I'm Victor Hale. I need to know more about that pendant." His words carried weight, and Clara paused, turning to study him. The Hale Hotel's logo loomed above them, his name etched into its legacy. "You're the owner," she said, her tone flat but edged with defiance. "What, here to make sure I don't come back?" "No," Victor said quickly, shaking his head. "I saw what happened in there." He gestured toward the lobby, where silhouettes of guests moved like nothing had changed. "I saw the man who caused the scene, and I saw Lowell fire you. But that pendant, it's not just a necklace. It means something to me." Clara's grip on the paycheck tightened, her knuckles white. She didn't trust easily, not after years of fending for herself and Ethan, but there was grief in his eyes, a crack in his polished exterior, that made her stay. "It was my mom's," she repeated, slower. "She gave it to me before she died. It's all I have left of her." Victor's jaw tightened, and he looked away, rain drumming on his umbrella. "Helena," he said again, almost to himself. "She wore one just like it. Exactly like it." Clara's breath caught. Her mother had been private, always deflecting questions about her past with a sad smile. But this man, this billionaire, seemed to know something Clara didn't. "You knew her?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. Victor nodded, his eyes distant. "A long time ago. Before you were born." He hesitated, then met her gaze. "I need to know more. About her. Will you come with me? Just to talk somewhere dry." Clara's instincts screamed to walk away. Rich men didn't stop to help soaked waitresses without wanting something, but the mention of her mother, the way he looked at the pendant, tugged at her. She thought of Ethan, alone at home, probably pacing by now. "I have a brother," she said. "I can't just leave him." Victor didn't hesitate. "Bring him. I'll send a car." "Please, I'm not trying to scare you. I need to understand." Clara studied him, rain dripping from her chin. She didn't trust him, not fully, but the pendant felt heavier now, like it carried secrets she'd never known. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chill. "But only because you knew her. And I'm not promising anything." Victor nodded, relief flickering across his face. He gestured to his driver, who hurried to open the car door. "What's your name?" he asked as Clara took a tentative step toward him. "Clara," she said, lifting her chin. "Clara Hayes." His eyes widened slightly, like the name struck a chord, but he didn't explain why. Instead, he said, "Clara, I'm not sure what this means yet, but that pendant, it's not a coincidence. Let's figure it out together." She nodded, clutching the paycheck and the necklace, her heart pounding with questions. The driver held the car door open, and Clara hesitated, glancing back at the hotel's glowing facade. She thought of Ethan, of her mother's quiet strength, and of the pendant that somehow tied her to this stranger. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Victor looked at her, rain catching in his hair, and said, "My office. It's quiet, and we can talk there. I just need to know." He stopped, his voice catching, and Clara tilted her head, waiting for him to finish. "Know what?" she pressed, her voice steady despite the chill seeping into her bones. The silver star pendant gleamed faintly against her soaked uniform, and Victor's eyes flicked to it again, his mind spiraling back to a memory he'd buried long ago. He gestured toward the open car door, the driver standing patiently in the downpour. "Please, Clara," he said, softer now. "Let's get you and your brother out of this rain. We'll talk, I promise." Clara hesitated, clutching her crumpled paycheck, then nodded once, her jaw tight. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but the mention of her mother's name, Helena, had cracked something open, and she needed answers as much as he did. The car ride was silent, the city's wet streets blurring past as Clara sat rigid in the leather back seat, Victor beside her. She texted Ethan, telling him to be ready, her fingers trembling not just from the cold. Victor's office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel, a world away from the cramped apartment she shared with her brother. When they pulled up to her building, Ethan was waiting under the awning, his thin frame hunched in a hoodie, his eyes wide with worry. At 14, he was all gangly limbs and quiet courage, but the sight of the black car made him freeze. Clara climbed out, rain still dripping from her hair, and pulled him into a quick hug. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure herself. This meant he knew Mom. "We're just going to talk." Ethan's gaze darted to Victor, who offered a small nod, and the boy followed Clara into the car, clutching his backpack like a shield. In Victor's office, the warmth of the space did little to ease Clara's nerves. The room was stark, polished wood, a single desk, and a wall of windows overlooking the glittering city. Victor offered them towels and coffee, but Clara stayed standing, Ethan close by her side. "So, talk?" she said, her voice firm but laced with curiosity. Victor sat across from them, his hands clasped tightly. That pendant, he began, his voice low, I gave it to a woman named Helena 30 years ago. We were in love. Clara's breath caught, and Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes searching her face. Victor's gaze drifted, lost in memory. We were young, barely 20. I made that star for her, had it crafted myself. But then she was gone. No letter, no reason. Just gone. Clara's fingers brushed the pendant, her mind racing. Her mother had never spoken of her past, always changing the subject with a sad smile. You're saying you knew my mom when she was my age? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor nodded, his eyes meeting hers. I think so. But I need to be sure. Tell me about her, Clara. Please. She hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who gave a small nod. She was kind, Clara said, her throat tight. Worked as a nurse, raised us alone. She never talked about her life before me. Just said the pendant was special, that I should keep it close. Victor leaned forward, his face etched with something raw. Did she ever mention me? Victor Hale? Clara shook her head, and a shadow crossed his face, like a door slamming shut. The memory came unbidden to Victor, sharp and vivid. He was 20, standing in a sunlit park, slipping the silver star around Helena's neck as she laughed, her eyes bright with promise. They'd planned a life together, but then the letters stopped. He'd written to her, dozens of them, but they came back unopened, some never sent at all, intercepted by his family staff, his sister, Margaret, most likely, who'd never approved of Helena. The betrayal had hardened him, turned him into the cold industrialist the world knew now. But seeing Clara, seeing that pendant, cracked that armor. Someone kept us apart, he said almost to himself. I never knew why she left. Clara's heart pounded. You think someone stopped her? She asked, her voice sharp. Victor nodded slowly. My family, they had their ways. My sister, Margaret, she runs my foundation now, but back then, she saw Helena as beneath us. Ethan shifted closer to Clara, his voice small but firm. If that's true, why didn't Mom ever tell us? Victor's eyes softened as he looked at the boy. I don't know, son. Maybe she wanted to protect you. Clara's grip on Ethan's shoulder tightened. She didn't trust this man fully, not yet, but the pendant was a thread connecting her mother to a past she'd never known, and she couldn't let it go. The next morning, Clara woke to a nightmare. Her phone buzzed with notifications, tabloids screaming across social media, Waitress scams Billionaire. The story was everywhere, twisted and vicious. Mr. Lowell, the hotel manager, had leaked details to the press, painting Clara as a scheming opportunist who'd manipulated Victor Hale with a sob story. Photos of her, drenched and humiliated outside the hotel, were plastered online, alongside cruel comments calling her a gold digger. Ethan found her staring at the screen, her face pale. Clara, what's happening? He asked, his voice trembling as he held up a newspaper with the same headline. She pulled him close, hiding her own fear. It's lies, Ethan. We'll be okay, she said, but her voice wavered. The world was tearing her down, and she felt that same invisibility from the night before, only sharper now. Victor called them to his estate that afternoon, a sprawling mansion that felt more like a fortress. Clara and Ethan arrived, still shaken, and were met by Margaret Hale, Victor's sister. At 50, she was sharp-tongued and impeccably dressed, her smile polite but cold as she led them to a grand library. Victor's tied up with calls, Margaret said, her eyes flicking over Clara's worn jacket with barely masked disdain. But I'd like a word. The door closed behind them, and Margaret's demeanor shifted, her voice low and cutting. I don't know what game you're playing with my brother, but it stops here. She slid a contract across the desk, money, a new apartment, a fresh start, if Clara and Ethan left Victor's life for good. Clara's stomach twisted, but she pushed the paper back, her voice steady. I'm not selling who I am. You don't know me and you don't know my mother. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Victor entered, his face stormy as he caught the tail end of their words. Margaret, enough, he snapped, his voice low but firm. Clara stood, Ethan at her side, and met Victor's gaze. Your sister thinks I'm after your money, she said, her tone defiant. Maybe you do too. Victor shook his head, his eyes on the pendant again. I don't, Claire. I think you're Helena's daughter, and I think there's more to her story than any of us know. He turned to Margaret, his voice colder. We're done with secrets. Clara stays. Margaret's face stiffened, but she said nothing, her silence louder than any protest. Clara's heart raced as she processed his words. The pendant felt heavier, a key to a past that was unraveling faster than she could grasp. Ethan squeezed her hand, his quiet courage grounding her. What happens now? She asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Victor looked at her, his expression a mix of determination and something softer, almost paternal. We find the truth, he said. Together. Victor's promise to find the truth hung in the air of the Grand Library, his voice steady yet softened by a flicker of something paternal as he looked at Clara. She stood resolute, Ethan's hand clasped tightly in hers, the silver star pendant glinting under the chandelier's soft glow. Her heart pounded, caught between the weight of her mother's hidden past and the sting of Margaret's icy ultimatum. The contract offering money and a new life in exchange for her silence sat untouched on the polished desk, a symbol of everything Clara refused to become. Margaret's silence was louder than words, her lips pressed thin, but Clara's defiance had shifted the room's balance. What truth? Clara asked, her voice firm despite the storm inside her. You think my mom kept secrets from me, from us, because of your family? Victor's eyes searched hers, seeing echoes of Helena's strength in her steady gaze. I think someone made sure she had to, he said, his tone heavy with regret. And you deserve to know who. The weeks leading to Victor's annual charity gala were a whirlwind of revelations and scrutiny. Victor insisted Clara and Ethan stay at his estate, not for its opulence but to shield them from the tabloid vultures circling after Lowell's leak. The headlines, Waitress scams Billionaire, had painted Clara as a cunning opportunist, twisting her pain into public spectacle. Each trip beyond the estate's gates meant dodging reporters, their cameras flashing like predators' eyes. Ethan, at 14, absorbed the cruelty in silence, his quiet courage bolstering Clara's resolve. Victor worked tirelessly, hiring investigators to unearth records of Helena's life, letters, dates, anything to confirm what he suspected. Clara watched him, wary but curious, noting the cracks in his cold billionaire facade. He wasn't just chasing answers, he was chasing redemption. The gala loomed, a glittering affair at the Hale Hotel where Clara's world had unraveled weeks ago. Victor urged her to attend, not as an outsider but as someone who belonged in his orbit. Clara hesitated, her stomach knotting at the thought of facing the same elite crowd that had witnessed her firing. She sat on the edge of her guest room bed, the navy dress Victor's staff had provided draped across a chair, its simplicity a stark contrast to the hotel's excess. Ethan, perched nearby, sensed her doubt. You're stronger than all of them, Clara, he said, his voice soft but sure. Mom would have gone. She'd want you to. Clara's fingers brushed the pendant, its silver star warm against her skin, and she nodded. For Mom, she said, her voice steadying. And for you. The Hale Hotel's ballroom sparkled under chandeliers, a sea of tuxedos and gowns swirling to the hum of a string quartet. Clara entered, Ethan at her side, the pendant her only adornment, its gleam a quiet defiance against the whispers that followed. Guests glanced her way, their murmurs sharp with curiosity and judgment. She felt the weight of their stares, each one a reminder of the night she'd been cast out, her apron in hand. Ethan's hand brushed hers, grounding her, and she lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. Across the room, Adrian Cross held court, his tech investor friends laughing too loudly at his quips. His eyes found Clara, and his smirk was instant, a blade honed by arrogance. He sauntered over, a champagne flute dangling in his hand, his voice carrying over the music. Well, isn't this a fairy tale? He said, loud enough to draw eyes. The waitress turned princess. Did Hale buy that dress, or did you pawn the pendant for it? Clara's cheeks burned, the old sting of humiliation flaring, but she held her ground, her voice low and even. You don't know me, Cross, and you never will. The crowd hushed, sensing the tension, and Ethan stepped closer, his eyes fierce despite his youth. Adrian's grin widened, relishing the attention. "Oh, I know enough," he said, gesturing at her pendant. "A sob story and a cheap trinket, and suddenly you're Hale's pet project. What's next, a trust fund?" Laughter rippled from his friends, but it was cut short by a voice that sliced through the room like steel. "Enough, Cross." Victor emerged from the crowd, his presence commanding every eye in the ballroom. At 52, he carried an authority that silenced even Adrian's bravado, though the younger man's smirk lingered. "What's this, Hale?" Adrian said, raising his glass. "Defending your little con artist? Or is there more to this story?" The insinuation hung heavy, and Clara felt the room's gaze tighten around her. She clutched Ethan's hand, her heart racing, but Victor's eyes blazed with a fury she hadn't seen before. "You don't speak about her," he said, his voice low but resonant, carrying to the farthest corners. "Clara is Helena's daughter." "My daughter." The words landed like thunder, freezing the room. Cameras flashed, capturing the shock on every face, and Clara's breath caught, her mind spiraling. Ethan's grip tightened, his wide eyes searching hers for confirmation. Margaret, poised near the stage in a sleek black gown, stiffened, her face a mask of controlled disbelief. She'd known Victor's suspicions, had fought to keep Clara at a distance, but this public declaration was a line she hadn't anticipated. Clara's knees weakened, the weight of Victor's words sinking in. "Your daughter?" she whispered, turning to him, her voice trembling. Victor faced her, his expression softening, though his eyes glistened with something raw. "I didn't know, Clara," he said, his voice loud enough for the crowd but meant for her. "Not until that pendant. Helena never told me. But I've had investigators dig, letters, records, timelines. You're mine, and I've failed you for too long." The room stayed silent, the weight of his admission hanging heavy, and Clara felt the pendant burn against her skin, a link to a past she'd never known. Adrian's smirk faltered, his confidence cracking under the room's stares. He muttered something to his friends, his voice low, and slipped toward the exit, his exit as quiet as his entrance had been loud. Clara's mind raced, piecing together fragments, her mother's silence, the pendant's weight, Victor's grief. She wanted to flee, to process this alone, but the crowd's eyes held her in place. Ethan's voice broke through, small but steady. "Clara, is it true? Is he our dad?" She looked down at him, her heart aching at the hope in his eyes, and managed a nod. "I think so," she said, her voice cracking. "But I need to understand it myself." Victor stepped closer, his voice softer now, meant only for her and Ethan. "I know this is overwhelming. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not yet. But I want to be in your lives, both of you. No more secrets." Clara's eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall, not here. She thought of Helena, her quiet strength, raising them alone in a world that often overlooked her. The pendant was her mother's love, her sacrifice, and now it was a bridge to a father Clara had never known. "She kept you from us," Clara said, her voice steadying as she spoke to Victor. "To protect us. I see that now." The gala resumed, but the air had shifted. Guests approached Clara, their tones softer, some offering apologies for believing the tabloid lies. Margaret remained apart, her face unreadable, but Clara caught a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or acceptance. Victor stayed near, not crowding her, his presence a quiet anchor. As the night wound down, Clara and Ethan slipped onto a balcony overlooking the city, the cool air a balm after the ballroom's intensity. The pendant gleamed under the starlight, and Clara touched it, feeling her mother's love woven with Victor's regret. Ethan leaned against her, his voice soft. "Are we gonna be okay, Clara?" She pulled him into a hug, her heart full. "More than okay," she said, her voice firm. "We're seen now." Victor joined them, standing a respectful distance away, his hands in his pockets. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't undo the years I missed, but I want to help build your future. Yours and Ethan's." She looked at him, seeing not the billionaire but a man haunted by loss, now reaching for connection. "We'll figure it out," she said, not a full promise but an opening. The city sparkled below, its lights stretching endless, and for the first time, Clara felt she belonged in their glow. The pendant, once a tether to her mother's memory, was now a symbol of her own strength, her visibility, and a family she was only beginning to understand. As the city lights faded into the distance, Clara's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, a single spark, like a star pendant, can light the way to truth and belonging. If this story of kindness, struggle, and redemption moved you, hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of resilience, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. Ring the bell so you never miss a moment. Thank you for being part of Clara's story. See you in the next one.